She wasn't a sniper, not anymore. Her job was rope, water, first aid. That's what the papers said, and that's what everyone believed until Raven's Teeth Canyon. 12 soldiers, one sniper above, no cover, no shot, then a single crack from behind. The woman they thought was just support had just saved them all. Already lowering her rifle, already logging wind speed. Some heroes lead from the front. She stayed behind so she could see what no one else did. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. They called her the mule behind the mission. The one with the rope, the iodine tablets, and the blister tape. Claire Whitman didn't mind. She arrived at Logan Pass outpost in Montana just after a snow squall, boots soaked from the shuttle drop, backpack regulation weight, and spotless. No fanfare, no handshake, no briefing beyond the checklist handed to her by a corporal with frozen fingertips. 34 years old, 5'6", broad-shouldered, pale-skinned, with a face that looked like it hadn't smiled in a long time. She moved with quiet discipline, not sluggish, but deliberate, as if every step had been rehearsed before sunrise. Her role was clear logistics and medical support for border patrols through Beartooth Ridge. That meant hauling water bladders, prepping trauma kits, checking rope tension, and calibrating weight distribution across backpacks. Nothing that required a rifle. Nothing that called for a trigger finger. Most in the team didn't even know who had approved her assignment, but Lieutenant Davis did. He had seen the name stamped on her file, redacted in all the right places. He had read the summary line near the bottom, reassigned per SOCOM Review Board Directive, non-combat status, recommendation utility support, and beneath that, the note he was told not to quote aloud, "Do not ask." So Davis didn't ask. He just watched. Claire bunked in the far corner of the barracks near the back exit, close to the tool storage. She didn't decorate her space, didn't hang photos, didn't play cards. Every night, after dinner, while the others argued over poker or scrolled their phones, Claire would lay out her equipment in silence. She inspected headlamps, cleaned med scissors with alcohol swabs, double-checked the tensile wear on carabiners, and when that was done, she sat with a small, weathered notepad, writing by flashlight. She never raised her voice, never joked, never asked to join in, which made her an easy target for whispers. "She's here because someone needed to fill a quota," said Private Lowell, snapping gum like he was back in high school. "Pretty sure she failed out of Ranger School and they just parked her here." Another chimed in. "I heard she came from logistics at Fort Bragg. Admin trash. Only one person didn't join in, Corporal Daniel Ramirez. He'd been on enough missions to know that the quiet ones were rarely empty. And there was something about the way Claire moved. How she traced the terrain lines on the topo maps like she was plotting more than just weight balance. How she always stood facing the ridge lines, as if measuring sight lines no one else cared about. One morning, as frost cracked under boots during equipment checks, Ramirez saw her retensioning a knot at the back of Sergeant Vaughn's pack. Not her job, but the knot had been 2 inches too loose. Claire hadn't said a word. She had just fixed it. Another day, she offered Davis a wind reading from the northwest crest. He didn't ask for it, but when the drone returned off course due to crosswind deviation, her numbers proved right. Still, most treated her like cargo. Useful, but silent. Low priority. "Hey, Whitman, double-check my iodine tabs. Would you pretty sure they're expired?" She nodded. Checked. Handed back replacements. No complaint. "Yo, rope girl." Someone barked. "Tension test on the bridge line." She was already tightening it before they finished the sentence. There was no eye-rolling, no muttering under breath. Just a quiet yes, Sergeant, or copy that. And then silence. At first glance, Claire seemed unremarkable. Hair pulled back tight, nails trimmed military short. No insignia except the standard support badge. No swagger, no stories, no trace of battlefield edge. But Ramirez had served with snipers before, and once, during a fogged-in afternoon at the range, He saw her watching a trainee struggle with elevation correction. Claire didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice, but when the trainee walked off, she knelt behind the spotting scope and adjusted at 3 clicks. He watched her breathe in, hold, and exhale through her nose. Her finger tapped the imaginary trigger twice, then nothing. She stood and walked off without firing a shot, just enough to know she could have. Ramirez followed her path one evening and saw her sit alone at the overlook near the western ridge. No phone, no book, just her notepad and a compact anemometer wind speed tool. She recorded numbers, adjusted for altitude, then tucked the gear away and disappeared into the dark. He later checked the patrol maps and noticed something odd. Wherever Claire camped or stood watch, she was always facing a choke point, a pass, a slope, a ridge with visibility. She never picked random spots, always the ones with angles. He brought it up, carefully, to Lieutenant Davis. "Sir, that Whitman, she's either overly prepared or trained beyond her billet." Davis looked up from his tablet, then leaned in. "Let me offer you a piece of advice, Corporal." "Yes, sir." "Don't ask her about the past. Understood. But if one day you need cover and can't find your designated shooter," he paused, "why not turn around? She's probably already aligned the shot." Claire never heard that exchange. She was in the equipment room that night, recalibrating the emergency thermal optics. Nobody asked her to. She just believed things should be ready, even if no one thought they'd be needed. Her rifle wasn't in plain sight. Technically, she wasn't authorized to carry one. But in the hard case at the bottom of her field locker was a folded MK-12 license still active under a grandfathered clause from SOCOM Command. She hadn't touched it in months. But every Sunday, she cleaned the parts, not out of nostalgia, but out of obligation. The past wasn't something she mourned. It was something she maintained. Quietly, one evening, Ramirez walked past her bunk and noticed a laminated card inside her locker barely visible. It was a commendation. Only the top line was readable, for exceptional precision under hostile fire. No frame, no dust, just kept. That week, their team was assigned to a 5-day high-altitude patrol through Beartooth Ridge, a notoriously unstable region, with recent intel suggesting unknown movement near the border. Most brushed it off as overcautious intel noise. Claire didn't. The night before the patrol, she sat alone under the shelter roof, marking her notebook with weather readings. Every 2 minutes, she lit a match, held it in the wind, and recorded the flicker angle. Ramirez passed her, but said nothing. He knew better now. Claire wasn't prepping for logistics. She was prepping for something else. She didn't want a bigger role. She didn't demand trust, but she knew if the moment came, it wouldn't wait for permission, and neither would she. The briefing room smelled faintly of old coffee and mountain dust. Lieutenant Davis stood at the head of the table, pointing to the satellite imagery projected on the far wall. 5-day sweep through Beartooth Ridge. High elevation, low traffic. Intel suggests recent movement near grid sector Bravo 12. Most of the team looked relaxed. Nothing had happened up there in months. Some were already thinking about the hot meal waiting at the end of it. But Claire Whitman didn't blink. She leaned forward, her eyes tracking the topographic layers like they were breathing. There was something in the pattern subtle, but off. When Davis opened the floor for suggestions, Claire raised her hand once. "Recommend we reroute the ascent path. That southern incline's got limited coverage. No overhead rock formations, but long sight lines from the ridge." A few heads turned. Some blinked. Sergeant Vaughn scoffed. "It's a supply run, not recon. We'll be fine." Claire nodded once and said nothing more. Ramirez noticed. He watched her that night in the gear room, scanning wind speed charts taped to the back of her notebook. She traced arrows over elevation sketches, pausing at notches in the terrain that no one else had bothered to mark. The next morning, while others were swapping energy bars and extra socks, Claire was adjusting the line weights inside each climbing harness. She calibrated the tension as if anticipating vertical extraction, not a typical logistics detail. No one commented. They had grown used to her precision. They just didn't understand it. As the patrol prepared to move out, Ramirez stayed back to help her load the last crate into the side trailer. He saw the hard case tucked deep in her gear compartment, gray, secured with 2 latches and a faded serial code etched near the lock. He didn't open it, didn't need to, but the lettering on the tag was unmistakable. MCAMUR 12 MOD 1, DMR classified. Where'd you get clearance to haul that? He asked softly. Claire paused for half a second. Retention clause, Section 14C, authorized under SOCOM waiver. He nodded once, then reported it. Not because he didn't trust her, because he wasn't sure how many others might be caught off guard if something went wrong. When Davis got the message, he didn't flinch. Just replied with a single line. I know. She has her reasons. The convoy moved out at dawn the next day. Snow had started to melt in patches, revealing wet shale beneath. The mountains stretched wide and silent, with wind curling between the ridges like a warning no one could hear. The team was in good spirits. They joked over the comms, shared music on shared earbuds. Claire walked at the rear, head slightly tilted, always scanning not the trees but the spaces between them. Ramirez started walking closer to her, not as a guard, not even out of suspicion anymore. Just to learn. She rarely spoke, but once, during a break near the 3rd trailhead, she tapped the side of his helmet and pointed toward the slope. See that frost line? He squinted. Yeah, means that patch holds shadow through noon. If someone wanted cover without losing vision, they'd sit there. Ramirez looked again. This time he saw at an angle with concealment, good escape routes, and a direct line toward the patrol route. It unsettled him how easily she'd spotted it. At the second night's camp, the wind picked up sharply. Most huddled inside their tents early. Claire didn't. She stood alone by the cliff edge, coat zipped to her chin, holding a short ignition wire in her hand. Every few minutes, she flicked it with a lighter. The flame curved sometimes to the right, sometimes straight up, once almost backwards. She recorded each flicker angle in her notebook. An old sniper trick, reading wind not by device, but by feel. Ramirez watched her from a distance. He recognized it now. She wasn't doing field prep. She was plotting a shot, and still, she said nothing. The 3rd morning, the route grew narrower. The team moved in staggered formation, single file, boots crunching snow and loose gravel. Claire lagged slightly, carrying the last of the rope coils and a secondary med kit. When Davis called for a halt near a boulder choke point, he motioned Claire forward to tighten the base anchors. She worked fast, tying each loop with surgical precision. Ramirez noted how her eyes never left the skyline, even while her hands moved. They broke for lunch by a shallow ridge with panoramic views of the valley below. Claire didn't eat. She sat with her back against a pine trunk, sketching something into her notepad. It wasn't terrain. It was angular, repetitive, like calculations. Ramirez stepped over, glanced down. She covered the page without speaking. That afternoon, the wind picked up again. A storm cell was building across the western shelf, moving faster than forecasted. Visibility began to drop as clouds pushed over the mountain face. Still, the mission continued. They were on the 4th leg, just 12 hours from their final checkpoint. No contact, no signs of intrusion. Most assumed the threat had been exaggerated, but Claire's pace grew more deliberate. She began marking trees with chalk, tiny slashes invisible to most, placed at 50-meter intervals. It wasn't a navigation code, it was range finding, a mental system to judge distance from memory if sightlines vanished. That night, Ramirez approached her tent. She was cleaning her boots methodically, not for hygiene but grip. You're expecting trouble, he said plainly. Claire didn't look up. I'm preparing for possibility. That's what support is. He hesitated, then asked, if something happens, should I stay near you? Claire looked at him, for the first time without any filter. You should stay near your team. I'll be where I need to be. Ramirez didn't sleep much that night. The wind howled against the nylon tent fabric, And somewhere in the back of his mind, something shifted. Not fear, not suspicion, just the certainty that something was coming. And Claire already knew it. At 0500, the team broke camp. The trail ahead curved toward Raven's Teeth Canyon, a narrow pass carved deep between twin cliffs. Visibility was minimal. Snow flurries danced like whispers. Lieutenant Davis walked near the front, Ramirez behind him. Claire remained at the rear, as always. At 0519, Davis gave the order to continue forward into the canyon. Claire knelt briefly, adjusting a strap. Then she stood up, eyes scanning the cliff line, and quietly stepped off the path, slipping behind a low rock shelf without a word. No one noticed. The canyon narrowed without warning. Walls of jagged shale rose like blades on either side, their edges frosted with early ice. The trail dipped, turned once, then vanished into a corridor of stone, barely wide enough for single-file movement. Lieutenant Davis slowed his pace and raised a fist. The team came to a halt just outside the entrance of Raven's Teeth. It was quiet, too quiet. No bird song, no wind, just the crunch of boots on loose gravel. He turned to Ramirez. "Comms check." Ramirez nodded, tapped his mic. Alpha 1, status green. Only static return. Davis frowned, tapped again. The signal wavered, broke apart, then died entirely. At the rear, Claire paused beside a boulder, adjusting a coil strap that had snagged on a broken root. Her head tilted slightly, catching the flicker brief. Silver, almost imperceptible off the upper ridge. Reflected glass. Scope glare. She blinked once, then stepped off the trail. No sound, no announcement. Just a quiet detour behind a moss-covered slab, and she was gone. The team pushed forward, 12 steps into the canyon. The first shot cracked like thunder. It came from above and across high elevation, steep angle. A puff of shale exploded near Davis's feet. He dropped instantly, shoulder catching hard on the rock, blood blooming across his jacket. "Sniper contact right," Vaughn shouted. The squad scattered for cover, diving behind fractured stone. Dust filled the air as a second shot struck the canyon wall inches from Ramirez's head. They were pinned. Nowhere to move. Nowhere to return fire. "Who's got visual negative? He's up on the ridge. Opposite side can't get a clear shot." Ramirez crawled to Davis. The lieutenant was conscious, bleeding from a gash on his arm. "Comms are dead," Davis muttered. "That's a jamming field." This was planned. The canyon had become a kill zone. The sniper had height, concealment, and line of fire on every path below. There was no way up, no reinforcement, and no margin for mistakes. They tried smoke, 2 grenades tossed, but the draft in the canyon swept the fog upward too fast, leaving them exposed again. "We're sitting ducks," Vaughn growled. "We need to flank where he's watching every line." Another shot snapped past, chipping rock 3 feet from their position. They ducked lower, then the fourth shot never came. Just a long pause, an eerie, suspended silence, and then crack. But this time, the sound didn't come from above. It echoed from behind them, up and left opposite the canyon entrance. A single, clean, unmistakable rifle report. No echo, no panic, just finality. Ramirez blinked. He leaned out just enough to glance up the ridge. The enemy sniper was gone. His body slumped over the ledge, rifle tumbling end over end down the slope. The canyon held its breath. For a second, no one moved. Then from the left flank up where no one had seen her go, Claire emerged slowly, boot over boot down the gravel. She cradled her MK-12 like it was part of her arm, the suppressor still warm, the scope cap flipping closed with a soft click. "Target neutralize," she said evenly. "Distance 488 meters. Elevation difference 11 degrees. Wind 7.4 knots. She stopped just short of the squad and knelt beside Davis. Unzipped her trauma pack. No one said a word. Ramirez broke the silence first. his voice hoarse. You saw him before we entered, didn't you? Claire nodded once. Second scope reflection. He re-angled after the first. Confirmed position 15 minutes prior. Vaughn stared at her, speechless. Davis looked up from the ground, half laughing through the pain. You waited. Claire pulled gauze from her kit, applied pressure to the wound. I needed confirmation. I had no shot until he committed. The MK-12 lay beside her, neatly field-stripped already, bolt resting on a cloth square. She moved like she'd done this 1,000 times. Because she had. Where the hell did that rifle come from? Vaughn muttered. Ramirez glanced over. She brought it. Legally. She had clearance. Davis nodded. I signed off on it. Then, more quietly, because someone up top told me she'd never use it unless she had to. Claire rewrapped the bandage, tightened it, then sat back on her heels. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Ramirez asked the question no one wanted to voice. Claire, who trained you? She didn't look up. A division that doesn't exist on paper anymore. Alpine Field Command, SOCOM Tier 2, 3rd Rotation, Kandahar Sector. She exhaled through her nose. Discharged 18 months ago. Medical clause, hearing loss, then softer, but the eyes still work. The squad was still frozen, processing what they'd seen. Vaughn looked down at the shattered enemy rifle lying halfway down the canyon wall. Then back at Claire. You saved all of us. Claire stood slowly, checked her gear, tucked the bolt back into its slot. You don't need to say anything, she replied. Davis was the last to speak as they regrouped. Still sitting against the boulder, he turned toward her. I should have asked earlier. Claire didn't smile, but her voice carried more than her words. Maybe, but if you had, I wouldn't have been in position when it counted. As they prepped for extraction, no one wanted to linger. Claire took rear position again. She never asked to lead. She never pushed forward. But every now and then, someone looked back. Not because she was behind them, but because they understood if the next shot ever came, she'd already be ready to return it. The official report was 7 lines, filed under Incident Code 44G, signed with initials and timestamp just after midnight. It mentioned engagement with hostile sniper, minimal casualties, and resolution by unit personnel. Claire Whitman's name appeared only once under supporting logistics. There were no commendations, no awards, no debriefing ceremony. The mission resumed the next day. Snow had melted further down the trail, revealing patches of black rock and stubborn weeds. The team walked in silence for the first few miles, each processing what had happened in their own way. Claire said nothing. She carried her med kit, her coils of rope, and a sealed rifle case strapped tight beneath the tarp, back in her usual position 50 meters behind. But something had shifted. At the next briefing, when Davis unrolled the terrain chart and marked the approach vectors, he paused mid-sentence, then turned slightly and asked, Claire, anything you'd recommend adjusting here? Heads turned, she stepped forward, eyes scanning the route. There's a low shelf on this slope. It creates a natural blind spot from the west. Recommend shifting 15 meters uphill. No one argued. Davis just nodded. Make the change. During camp setup, she wasn't the only one checking the anchor knots anymore. Others started mirroring her methods, testing tension, correcting angles. Ramirez noticed how Vaughn watched her movements, subtly copying the way she positioned gear for rapid access. Respect had arrived quietly, without declaration, without ceremony. Back at Logan Pass Outpost, Ramirez started a new notebook, not the standard mission log. This one he kept personal. He titled the first page "The One Who Stood Where No One Watched." He wrote down the full timeline of that day, every wind reading Claire had mentioned, every angle she had considered before anyone else even saw the threat, and at the bottom, in capital letters, position rear, purpose vision. Lieutenant Davis didn't say much for 2 days after they returned. Then, one evening, he sat in the comms room, typed a message, and sent it to a secure SOCOM channel. It was a recommendation for reinstatement partial. He requested her clearance for tactical assessment, not full deployment. The last line read, "She never left the fight. We just stopped seeing her in it." Claire never mentioned the letter. She continued attending loadout briefings, still carried the water filters, still rotated the med kits. But now, when the squad ran elevation drills, someone always asked her to verify the gradient. When they reviewed possible extraction points, she was given the red marker. And when a new recruit joined the unit 2 weeks later, Ramirez pulled him aside and said, "If she tells you to duck, don't ask why." One morning, Sergeant Vaughn approached her before patrol. He held out a laminated card standard issue sniper range calculation sheet. "I could use help understanding these again," he muttered. Claire took it without a word. By evening, he was hitting targets he used to miss by yards. She wasn't teaching. She was just sharing what she knew. And they listened now. Word traveled quietly through the outpost. Not gossip, not awe, just quiet facts whispered from one squad to another. "She's not what you think. She saved our whole line without blinking. She never missed." But Claire never changed how she carried herself. Still ate alone sometimes, still packed early, still stood near the back when everyone formed up. And yet when someone scanned the ridgeline now, they would always glance behind them first, not out of doubt, but for reassurance. At one rest stop, 2 weeks later, the squad settled near a rock outcrop. The new guy, Private Green, sat beside her, nervously adjusting his rifle sling. "You always stay back here?" he asked. Claire nodded. "It's where I see the most." He looked out over the valley, didn't speak for a moment, then said, "It's weird. I thought being behind meant being out of it." Claire looked at him. "Sometimes it means being above it." When Davis saw them talking, he didn't interrupt. Just watched with a tired kind of pride. The kind commanders feel when the team finally starts to understand what they almost missed. There was no plaque, no email blast, no inspection with higher-ups coming to shake hands. But Ramirez noticed something small one morning. On the inside wall of the barracks gear shed, someone had scratched a line into the wood. Not word, not a quote. Just the silhouette of a lone figure, holding a rifle, facing backward. The rest of the squad's footprints marched ahead, but she faced the opposite way. It wasn't signed. No one claimed it, but everyone knew what it meant. A month after the ambush, a new unit rotated into Logan Pass. They were young, loud, confident, thought they knew everything, until one of them tried to cut across Claire in the armory line and said, "Support goes last." Ramirez heard the words. So did Davis, but neither needed to respond. The rest of the squad just turned and waited. Claire stepped forward, and the new guy stepped back. That was all. She still didn't carry a call sign, still didn't wear a sniper's pin, still listed as utility support on the roster sheet, but every team she joined after that marked her differently in their notes. Some circled her name, some underlined it, and at every patrol briefing, no matter who was in charge, the same question now got asked at least once. "Claire, do you see anything the rest of us don't?" She rarely answered with more than a nod, but when she did, they listened. There are some people who shout to be seen, and others who move so precisely that silence becomes impossible to ignore. Claire never told her story. She didn't need to. The team carried it for her and changed habits, in smaller questions, in the way they placed her name first when planning fallback routes. Not all heroes stand on the highest rock. Some kneel behind the last boulder, waiting for the shot that no one else is ready to take. And sometimes the person at the back of the line is the reason the line makes it home.